welcome. So today we're going to be doing a new style of City Skylines build. This is going to be a 1 hour build. This is just to showcase what you can do in 1 hour on City Skylines using no mods. If you want to, I'm using 3 different mods for this. I'm using Network Extension 2, Move It, and 1 Million Money Start mod. But you don't need those. So just saying that for the record, this is going to be a pretty much vanilla build, no assets, nothing fancy. And I wanted to show that you can create something beautiful using just the basic assets in the game. So when I start my city, I start out by building the downtown area. The downtown area is almost always going to be the most grid-like. You want to have the straightest streets. You want to have traffic managed properly because it's going to be the heaviest traffic area. So I started out with that major road. You always start with the major roads. And I had it sort of aligned to the terrain. I noticed there was a little outcropping of rock over here by this freeway entrance, and there's the hill over on the right. So I chose to take advantage of this little space to create an industrial area, and then put a major road that kind of runs between, splitting the 2 different areas. Very important to do that because then your major roads are all laid out exactly where they need to be for the future. I also kind of decided that this section against the hillside was going to look really great with houses up and down it. That's why I chose to make this the neighborhood side. So anytime you're doing these curved roads, I really recommend turning off grid snapping. If you turn off grid snapping, you can get more unique curves. And by doing a lot of these little curves, you can still create a very thick neighborhood of houses without doing just square blocks of city. And as you work from the outside to the inside, you can sort of control the urban sprawl. So this is one of the major reasons I start with the inner section of the city first. You know it's going to be grid-like. It's where the majority of your traffic's going to be. And if you got your downtown area defined, then really everything around it can just turn into residential. So getting that first area laid out first is very important. The commercial area, the downtown area first, very important. And you'll notice that I make a transition here from curved roads over to larger blocks down to smaller blocks. The reason I do that is because it creates a nice transition area between the outer urban sprawl area, the outer residential sprawl, and the inner city portion. Now, ultimately, this is only going to go up to like a 7,000 or a 10,000 population, so it's not going to be your full city. But for like an outer section of what's eventually going to be your major city, I thought it looked pretty nice. And I wanted to kind of provide people some opportunities to look at different build paths, because I know so many people feel pigeonholed. Like they don't know how to design their cities. They don't know what to do. They run into traffic issues. So by designing, you notice I left this big gap area too, right here, so I can put the national road through. Again, that provides 2 major roads running through the section of Little City. And for a city population that only gets up to about 10,000, this is plenty of roads. You got a highway, you got a major avenue. The major avenue runs all the way through the commercial district, all the way up to the industrial district. And it provides so many different opportunities for that. Now, generally, you want to set up your industrial section off the right side of your freeway because you want all the traffic to not have to cross over on your major highway. Just because of the layout of this build and because it was going to be a lower population area with a smaller industrial area, I chose to go ahead and put it on the left. I just thought it looked better there, and I wanted to provide more opportunity for urban sprawl, for specifically residential sprawl into other areas. So I was trying to keep the commercial and industrial over here on this side. And you can see already, we're starting to have a downtown area come together pretty nicely without using any real grid at all. Now here, I forgot I did this. This section I was trying to find. I always like to take a scenic tour into my city, but then I remembered that I'm going to be doing this at 4 times speed, so it's going to look insane. I'm sorry if that looked insane. But yeah, I like to take a little cruise into my city every time I build one because it's really important. I think it's really important to see your city from the ground level. If you want to understand where you should build things, you really need to look at it from the ground. You can't just look at it from up in the air like this. You've got to get down on the dirt, go stand on a hilltop, You know, go zoom in somewhere. Take a look at the scenic views from different areas of your city before you start laying this stuff out. And you can kind of get an idea of exactly, it just sort of paints itself. You know, if you look at it from all the angles, I spent a little bit of time before I started recording this just sitting on the hillside over here on the right, taking a look at the beachfront across the water and taking a look at this rock formation over here by the industrial area. Yeah, so I knew that I was eventually going to have to expand across the river here. I tried to leave some major road avenues so that I could stretch that straight across. But you also... excuse me. I'm getting distracted because I'm trying to read notes here. So, yeah, I created this area where I could expand this major bridge across. It looks a little wonky. This is probably one of the only times I used Move It, I think, throughout the entirety of this, just to sort of raise this bridge up. But I tried to lay this area out in a way that no matter what the population ended up being or what the demand ended up being, there was plenty of opportunity to expand into the gaps between the various blocks of city. You notice there's a big industrial area, a big residential area, and a big commercial area. Right there, you can see I uncolored the section here and left it sort of open for residential. I was going to make that commercial at first, but then I decided, you know what, I want to kind of make this transition area. We'll put it residential there, and if later on my demand gets higher for commercial, I can always erase that section and balance it out. And don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid to balance out the sections of your city. You know, I get this whole thing laid out like this, but sometimes your numbers aren't right. You know, sometimes you don't put enough commercial area, or sometimes you don't put enough residential. Usually it's a residential that we end up short on, because about 2/3 of your overall city size ends up being residential. Like at a minimum, it's a pretty significant portion. And that's why I always build the downtown areas first, because then residential can expand as much as needed on the outskirts of the city, and it makes it look natural. So again, you can see over here across the river, I'm starting to build out another sort of downtown area. Now, I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do with this. I knew I was going to put houses up here on this section, and I was kind of aware by this point that I was going to need more residential for just the sheer size of commercial area I created across the river. But I left this corner at the bend of this avenue completely untouched at first, because I wasn't sure if I wanted to turn it into another commercial area or an industrial or possibly residential. So I just left it completely untouched at this point in the video, just to try to leave myself some options. And that's another tip I'd give. You know, I kind of hinted at it earlier, but build your sections far enough apart that you can build towards each other, and that will create a nice little mesh between your various areas of the city. You know, right now I'm just cleaning up some power lines, putting parks down, services, things like that as they become unlocked in the city. Generally, you want to make sure you leave large gaps for schools, fire departments, other services, and things like that. Now, I also ran, I'm not sure if I did it yet, but I ran a gravel road up the, I'm going to call it the north side of the city. It doesn't look like I've done it yet. We'll see it come up here in a moment. But because the trash is located over on the industrial side, generally you run into pollution issues if you put incinerator or something over by your residential side. So what you end up with is this long path that the incinerator has to, or excuse me, the trash trucks have to take to go all the way to the other end of the city and all the way back. Start running into trash issues if you do that. So I built a little road up the mountain over here to create a services area. I also do it along the river as well, and that creates two different areas for services as we build into this city. Now, I put a roundabout in the center of the commercial district. I thought it just added a little flavor. But yeah, you'll notice that I keep following one particular theme here. I always build large outer road sections in curved formats and then start filling out the insides. So you build the large shape, and then you can sort of create the inner shape however you want. And in a lot of cases, the terrain, the formations like that rock formation there, they just sort of create themselves. It just sort of creates the neighborhood itself. And it ends up looking non-traditional and non-grid-like. Now, I realize those were some squares over there, but, you know, generally they're not little tight blocks. It's got a good curve around the outside. And eventually the city does all come together. So that's the one thing we're going to do at the end of the video. I kind of let it run after I get done recording this. This is a 1 hour build, and that's all I spent building it. But I do let it run for like 20 or 30 minutes afterwards just to flush out the city so you can get a good shot of what it looks like completed. But yeah, the services road's coming in up here. I believe I end up putting a graveyard in up here, an incinerator. Yeah, so this area, you know, it has the opportunity for expansion. I thought it'd look kind of nice with the road over by the windmills, but I noticed that there was nowhere to really take it, and rather than try to force it down that steep cliff, I figured I'd just let it dead end. You know, it'll be like a service road that goes out to the windmills. And that's one of the other things that I think kind of helps me with creating my cities, is looking at it from a realistic standpoint. You know, like if you have to drive somewhere, where do you have to go? This is of course a speed build, and so I was just flying through it, but I generally spend a lot more time on the ground, you know, standing on a street corner or standing over by the industrial area and just watching trucks go by and getting in touch with your city. You know, I kind of approach this game in like a Bob Ross sort of mentality. You know, I feel like the area just sort of creates itself. You got to let the brush flow across the canvas, and yeah, you know, it all just kind of comes together. You got to trust yourself. You got to trust that it's going to come together correctly. There's no wrong way to build these cities. The only problem, well, I say that, I did want to point this out. I have one bridge across to the other section. Generally, you want to have quite a few more connections than this. I had intended to build another bridge across to the downtown area and connect it up over to the freeway, so it would have 3 different ports of entry onto it. I didn't end up doing that in this video, so keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. You want to try to keep as many traffic inlets and outlets as you can, because it gives your citizens plenty of opportunity to choose different routes to go to their destinations. So the highway, again, leaves plenty of expansion room on either side. We're doing this without the 81 tiles mod on at this time. So you can see I don't have that opportunity to expand out to the west. Do we call it west? Yeah, it's north, so that would be west. We'll call it that. Not quite yet, but I do end up doing that just so I can expand out my industrial area, because I wanted to make sure that we get these residential areas flushed out and that the city got big enough to actually flush. I mean, it's supposed to be an hour city build. You know, we could have stopped here, but I wanted to make sure that it filled itself out fully. So again, don't be afraid to rezone your city. These little transition areas that I'm creating between the various districts have so much potential. You know, I could put houses on one side, I could rezone it over to commercial if my commercial demand's a little high. And you generally don't want to have all your residential, all your commercial, and all your industrial all in one spot. You want to kind of break it up throughout the city. So this is not the most optimized design. It's going to create a lot of traffic in 2 key areas. Generally, you'd want to put like another, back by those rocks, for example, in the top center. You know, put another commercial area up there or something like that. That way you can just kind of spread out your traffic a little bit. But at this point, it was all about the design. I wanted to make it nice and simple. These are all like afterthought, hindsight things. You know, we can do that endlessly talking about these videos. Looking back over, I'm like, wow, we should have put this here and that there. You know, with parks and things like that, you'll notice I'm just slapping them down. I don't care about parks. I'm not a huge detailer when it comes to city skylines, but I like creating something interesting to look at and something beautiful. And I feel like now this right here is a good example of what you can do even in a grid section. You'll notice I have the grid laid out all the way around that, but I chose to take advantage of a feature that was found in the middle of it to create a unique neighborhood section directly in the middle of what's eventually going to be residential. So that rock area is going to fill out with houses back there, and it's going to create something pretty interesting, even though it's in the middle of a grid. So between all this, you know, when you start combining all these little pieces together, you start creating something pretty awesome. So this area down here, I still wasn't sure if I was going to make it residential or commercial, or even industrial. I decided to just kind of lay it out and see what would happen. We do end up filling it out with, I think, a mix of both, but you can do all this just by creating these little jigs and jags and roads. You don't need anything fancy. You don't need a bunch of mods to make a beautiful looking city. So if you guys enjoyed this video, I'd be happy to do some more videos like this using all the basic maps. If you guys found this interesting, go ahead and like the video, hit the subscribe button and all that stuff. And I will see you next time. If you have any questions, let me know. Y'all take care.